Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on The Story Within, we retell those moments, honest, everyday, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. I first met the woman my son intended to marry on a night when the wind pushed down from the Rockies and rattled the bare aspens like wind chimes. Lucas brought her to my craftsman bungalow in northwest Denver, the one with the blue door and the porch swing that still complains in my late husband's rhythm. Her name was Bianca Conti. She stepped through the entryway in a camel coat and a silk scarf the color of bitter oranges, and the room seemed to adjust itself to her as if the house had been waiting for that exact shade. "Mrs. Hale, it's such a pleasure," she said, taking my hands in both of hers. Her smile had the tactful wattage of a stage light, bright enough to flatter, soft enough to suggest sincerity. Lucas hovered behind her with the anxious pride of someone who has finally brought home the thing he's been guarding: the story, the answer, the companion. My son is 35 and brilliant with numbers, but notoriously blind to theater. He can parse a budget to the bone and miss the way someone anchors a compliment with a glance toward the nearest mirror. We ate at my walnut table, a long piece rescued from a shuttered boarding school when I was still married and still in the habit of believing everything good would last. I made rosemary chicken and fennel salad, and Bianca adored each bite in gracefully accented English. She admired the framed Polaroids along the hallway, lingered over Lucas's kindergarten photo, where he's missing his front teeth, asked the kind of questions that turn a host soft. "Where did you find that ceramic pitcher? Was Miguel the one who built the spice rack?" She called me Signora once or twice, a flourish that made Lucas grin. He has always loved the way other languages sound in the mouth, the way they make the ordinary feel like a passport stamp. "Bianca speaks 5 languages," he said, squeezing her fingers under the table. "She consults for boutique hotels, branding, guest experience, that sort of thing. She's been thinking about opening her own firm." "Only when the universe is kind," she said modestly with a musical laugh. "Denver has surprised me." She surprised me too. There was a certain precision in how she occupied space, as if she'd practiced walking into rooms and dimming to the exact glow that makes people exhale. If you've ever worked front desk at midnight in a city no one loves in the morning, you learn to spot performance. I spent a summer in Florence when I was 20, changing sheets in a pensione and translating for tourists who forgot every verb but to want. I understand stagecraft. I also understand how easily people fall in love with it. After dinner, Lucas excused himself to take a call from a client in California, the blessing and curse of time zones. I started clearing plates. Bianca offered to help, and I let her because it's a better test of character than anything clever. She stacked the dishes carefully, carried them to the sink, and then her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at the screen and answered with the impatience of someone who treats the device like a leash on other people. Her tone switched mid-inhale. Italian quick and liquid. "Si mamma tutto bene. Tranquilla." "Yes, Mom, everything's fine. Relax." I turned on the tap. The faucet roared. I did not turn it down. "Lei è innocua," Bianca continued, not bothering to lower her voice. "She's harmless." A beat, a small sigh. "Il figlio è completamente preso. Dolce. Facile. The son is completely taken. Sweet. Easy." She laughed softly. "La casa è più grande di quanto lui dicesse. E sì, ci sono beni di famiglia. Ha detto che il marito era prudente. Ah, e il passaporto coniugeo 2 anni, poi basta. Torno in Europa con quello che serve." I hadn't had reason to use my Italian in a decade. Miguel and I took our last trip before his diagnosis, and since then, language had become mostly the grammar of hospitals. But I didn't miss the shape of that verb, basta. Enough. 2 years of marriage, and then enough. Citizenship on a hook. Family assets in the net. My grip on the plate changed. The sound it made against the porcelain sink was too bright, like something expensive discovering its own fracture. Bianca moved closer, perhaps to see if I'd heard. People who operate by assumption become sloppy. People who think their language is a curtain assume no one like me stands behind it. She kept speaking: "Non preoccuparti, mamma. Lei è una vedova. Vuole solo che il figlio sia felice. La convinceremo. Tutto è già in movimento. Don't worry. She's a widow. She only wants the son to be happy. We'll persuade her. Everything is already in motion." A glass went to the edge of the counter and kept going. It shattered on the tile in the true voice of brittle things. I knelt to gather the pieces, slow, deliberate, letting my hands learn the map of the mess. Bianca set her phone face down and reached for a broom. "I'm so sorry," she said in English, concern perfectly balanced on the line between practical and tender. "Please let me." "It's only a glass," I said. "I've lost worse." She tilted her head, that sympathetic angle cultivated by people who are very good at being adored. She swept with the efficiency of someone who once worked where tips determined rent. In Florence, my first job, hotel housekeeping, she offered as if it were a confession. It taught me how to notice the small things. I know that city, I said. Do you? She brightened. Then you know what the Arno looks like at sunrise. I do. I also know the word vodka when I hear it, though. She hadn't used it. Bianca was too careful to be cruel without purpose. She had calculated the space, the noise of the faucet, Lucas's absence, the assumption that a widow in a blue-doored bungalow in Colorado couldn't possibly pull meaning from the quick slant of her vowels. Lucas returned then, humming with the friction of a problem solved. He saw us in our choreography, me at the sink, Bianca with the broom, and looked almost foolish with happiness. You two, he said, are already a team. Bianca slid the broom back into the pantry as if she lived in my house and knew where everything went. Your mother is Maravigliosa, she said. She makes everything feel settled. She placed a hand lightly on my forearm, a gesture that read as affection and registered in my body as a claim. We had coffee in the living room. Snow began in tentative confetti against the window. Bianca told a charming story about a mix-up at the ski rental shop. She'd been given children's boots and hadn't realized until she wondered why the world felt so tight, and Lucas laughed in the way he used to laugh when he was 9 and built forts with my sofa cushions. She asked about Miguel, and I obliged, pulling the thread carefully, his habit of labeling the backs of photographs, his superstition about airline seats, the way he hid love notes in the Thanksgiving china. She made a sympathetic sound at the right moment. She has a good ear for the music of the past. She knows which chords prompt people to improvise. Tell her about your plans, Lucas said suddenly, as if the idea had just presented itself whole. About maybe staying. Bianca gave him a look that translated to let the cake finish baking before you open the oven, and he blushed. We're not in a rush, she said to me. I am here on a visitor visa while I work remotely for European clients, and I'm learning how the city breathes. We'll see. We'll see. The phrase is a key that fits any lock. A minute later, their rideshare arrived. Bianca buttoned her coat at the door and kissed both my cheeks in that performative European way Americans read as intimacy. Thank you for the dinner, Signora, she said. I feel welcomed. You're very kind, I replied evenly. Drive safe. The roads glaze in the first half hour. When the door clicked shut, the house exhaled. The window reflected a version of me I recognize but don't always acknowledge, a woman whose hair has gone silver at the temples, whose shoulders know how grief sits down, whose kitchen floor holds a tremor only she can feel. I washed the cups slowly. The scent of rosemary rose again and made the night feel almost edible. When the silence thinned enough to let other things through, I went down the short hallway to the room we still call the study. Miguel's desk remains against the wall, though I moved the pencil jar to the left side because I'm left-handed, and I do not believe ghosts worry about stationery. The drawers held what they always hold: tax returns filed neatly, the deed to the house, the small book where Miguel used to write one sentence each day, usually about the sky. The portfolio statements were sleepier than they were a decade ago. We've been cautious, and caution rarely outperforms, but they were respectable in their quiet way. The house itself had appreciated beyond our ordinary imaginations. This neighborhood has that effect, the way proximity to a view turns ordinary wood into an asset. I'm telling you what I looked at, because it tells you what I heard in Bianca's call, not just an insult wrapped in a foreign lullaby, but a blueprint. 2 years. Marriage as a corridor. Community property in a state where love and law often share a bedini that looks simple until someone counts the drawer handles. Citizenship like a final stamp at the end of a carefully timed scavenger hunt. There is a kind of thief who steals out of hunger, and a kind who steals because the taking itself is a profession. Bianca's voice contained the muscle memory of practice. My phone vibrated on the desk, a text from Lucas. Thank you for tonight. She really likes you. A second later, another message. I know you'll look out for us. The pronoun made my throat sting in a way that wasn't tears exactly. I typed, get home safe, and deleted it. I typed, the roads are already slick, and deleted that too. In the end, I sent a heart, cowardly maybe, but sometimes the smartest thing a parent can do at midnight is speak in symbols. I lay awake for a while and tried to imagine confronting him. I pictured Lucas's face closing like a book that refuses a new chapter, the way he'd say "Mom" elongated in exactly the tone he uses when he thinks I'm interfering. He has always been a decent man. Decency makes a reliable bridge for other people to cross with their shoes wiped clean on your welcome mat. We have an old family superstition no one admits to believing: do not make the first decision after midnight. I compromised by making a decision and then requiring it to survive dawn. So I made tea, sat at the desk where the good pens live, and wrote down what I knew. She called me harmless. She described a plan. She believes language is a locked door. The list steadied me the way lists do when the world widens, put it in numbered rooms. When dawn finally arrived, pale and grainy, it found me exactly where midnight had addressed me, In my robe hair in a loose knot, the study salted with paper, I brewed fresh coffee and took the first sensible step a widow learns after the casseroles stop arriving: check the locks. Not the ones on the doors, the ones on the accounts, the beneficiary designations, the assumptions. Miguel was meticulous about protections, but meticulous people sometimes forget to explain their systems to the person who will inherit the systems. As I worked, the house lifted into the day, the neighbor's dog issuing its 9 o'clock announcement, the plow taking a bite of the street, a jogger's breath making small clouds. I paused at the photograph of Lucas on the mantel, 16 and sunburned and holding the trout he caught, and then let go. His eyes are narrower now. He is still that boy, and also not. The men we love become jurisdictions where our old maps are both beautiful and obsolete. By the time the sunlight found the far wall, I had what I needed, a sober inventory of what could be lost and what could not. The second cup of coffee tasted braver than the first. I stood at the window and watched the light thread through the bare branches. The porch swing creaked twice, which is the exact number of creaks, after which Miguel always said jokingly, we should oil that, and never did. I dialed no one. I wrote no emails. I rehearsed no speeches for Lucas that began with, you won't want to hear this, but, and ended with me being the villain in my own kitchen. Instead, I did the least dramatic, most adult thing I could manage. I put the kettle back on. I folded the dish towel. I opened my laptop and made a list with 3 columns, name, claim, proof. People think protection is a weapon. More often it's a ledger. Outside, the sky shifted toward the clear blue that makes Denver look like a postcard. I closed the study door and let the day continue its ordinary work around me. The decision sat where I had left it, plain as an old coin on the counter. I would not confront Lucas. I would verify. I have learned that accuracy can be a kindness even when it arrives without fanfare. Accuracy is a kindness, but it is also work. The morning after Bianca's visit, I sat at the dining table with a yellow legal pad and treated my house like a witness. Every framed photograph, every labeled folder in the study, every small domestic fact that might look like soft fruit to an experienced picker, I listed them with the patience I reserve for recipes that refuse to rise unless you beat air into them by hand. Lucas texted mid-morning to say he'd made it to the office on time and the roads were fine. I sent back a thumbs up because the icons let you keep meaning small. Then I opened my laptop and typed Bianca Conti Consults Hotels Denver and pressed return. What came back had the thin gloss of something spray lacquered for distance. An Instagram with striking photos heavy on sunsets, seen through lobby windows. A LinkedIn that listed hospitality brand architect, as if nouns could be rearranged into careers. A handful of tags from the last 18 months that looked more like a mood board than a life. Her Italian past was a faint watercolor, one university reference, a couple of cafes that could have hosted anyone's cappuccino, a cluster of geotags in Florence and Milan where the caption said everything and the comments said nothing. People build scrapbooks when they want to be found. People build portfolios when they want to be hired. Bianca's presence read like a brochure. By noon, I needed something less interpretive than the internet. I called Nora, my sister's youngest, who works somewhere with a badge in an office that cannot be photographed. I asked her to lunch the way I ask when I want to hear what she isn't allowed to put in writing. We met at a Nepalese place on Colfax that still cooks like the steam matters. You're wearing your verdict face, Nora said, sliding into the booth. She has my family's steadiness, but none of our deference. Start with the part you think is boring. I told her everything that didn't require me to be dramatic, the dinner, the Italian on the phone, the cadence that sounded like practice more than culture. I did not use words like con or theft. I described the structure and let the nouns remain unaccused. Nora listened the way good clinicians do. Eyes quiet, fingers still. When I finished, she opened her bag and took out a small spiral notebook. She wrote while she spoke as if talking to me and to a ledger both. Marriage-based immigration is mostly made of love and paperwork, she said. The fraud part is mostly made of timing and stories. The fastest tells are background too clean or too convenient references that answer a little too well in family with details that slide when you press them. I'm not asking you to look anything up, I said. I know, she said. And I'm not offering. I'm reminding you that people who operate for a living tend to repeat the choreography. If she's doing what you think she's doing, she's probably done it before, and the best place to meet her is not in the stories she tells, but in the parts she forgets to edit. Which are old addresses, Nora said, company registrations that expired, photos where the background tells more truth than the caption, and parents. If parents appear on cue, make sure they were rehearsed by the same director. Lucas mentioned Bianca's parents, I said carefully. They might visit next month. Nora stowed the notebook. Then feed them, she said. Food is declarative. People relax where they're meant to be polite. Any other counsel? 2 things, she said. First, document what you see as if you'll have to hand it to someone who doesn't love Lucas the way you do. Second, don't expect the first piece of truth to do the whole job. It rarely does. We ate dumplings and didn't talk about laws. When I hugged her goodbye, she held on half a second longer than she usually does, which felt like an oath from a person who lives among unspoken things. By the time I got home, the plows had combed the streets down to a scratchy black. The study smelled faintly of graphite from the pencils I'd sharpened and then not used. I dialed a number I'd found through a friend who has a talent for finding the people other people hire when the problem needs to be solved without ripples. The man who answered identified himself simply as Ethan Park. He did not advertise as a private investigator. He called his work background verification. I don't want drama, I said. I want the kind of facts a dull person can't argue with. The duller, the better, he agreed. His voice had the efficient kindness of a good math teacher. Emails only. No surprises. I'll tell you what's knowable. I gave him what little I had Bianca's name and the outline of a resume that might have been written in a meeting about branding. He asked for nothing else, not even my son's name, and hung up with a promise to send a scope and a fee. The email arrived 9 minutes later. It was short enough to trust. Lucas came for dinner that Friday, cheerful and tired and eager to channel both into storytelling. He talked about a client's budget that wouldn't balance because the client didn't want it to, and about a coworker's dog that had learned how to open the fridge. He talked about Bianca, the way people talk about a city they've only visited in perfect weather. She met with a boutique hotel on Larimer, he said, buttering bread with the concentration of someone performing a skill their hands love. They were blown away by her pitch on scent mapping. Did you know smell is the most direct path to memory? I did, I said, setting down the roasted carrots. I married a man who could change his mood by opening a jar of cumin. Lucas laughed and his shoulders loosened. When he's happy, he looks like a boy who knows where to run. When he's in love, he looks like a man convinced the map is finally clear. I told Bianca how much you love Florence, he said. She says her parents would adore you. Where do they live? Naples, he said. Her father taught literature. Her mother works with municipal permits. He said it like a list he'd memorized from a brochure. They could come next month. Would you be up for hosting? Of course, I said. I kept my voice level because tone is a magnifying glass, and I had no interest in enlarging anything. After he left, I stood in the doorway and listened to the house recalibrate to one occupant. The porch swing voiced its usual 2 creaks. I thought of the word harmless spoken in a language that had once been mine and decided names were not the same as truths. Ethan's first email came on Monday. It was full of dull things, business entities inactive, a hotel in Rome that had shut down the year Bianca claimed to have consulted for it, a phone number in Milan answered by a recorded message that never included a human name, a short-term rental address in Denver occupied for 6 weeks, then vacated the same month Lucas first mentioned her, a university credential that checked but no instructors who remembered a student by that exact name. A secondary surname surfaced in an old lease, Bianca Cataldi, common enough to shrug off, specific enough to make me pay attention. There's nothing obviously illegal in any of this, Ethan wrote. There is a pattern of engineered vagueness. People who live in the open usually leave incidental footprints. Your subject's footprints look curated. Curated. A word for museums and Instagram, a word that turns life into an exhibit. I thanked him and closed the laptop, because sometimes the most adult thing you can do with information is let it sit there without asking it for more than it can give. 2 weeks later, a text from Lucas, great news. Bianca's parents confirmed. Next Saturday, dinner at yours. I said yes, and added 700 because people who arrive at 7 are rarely drunk by 9. On Friday, I set the table the way Miguel used to when guests mattered, the wide plates that capture gravy without letting it sulk the linen napkins with the faint tobacco stain near one edge, because he once told a story so funny he forgot he was holding a cigarette. I made ossobuco because bone and marrow tell the truth about time, and I roasted fennel because some flavors announce themselves plainly. At 6:58, the doorbell rang with the politeness of people raised to ring once. Bianca stood on my porch with an elegant older couple who might have been clipped from a travel magazine, Adriano in a dark jacket with neat shoulders, Lucia with pearl earrings and the specific perfume that implies family money older than airports. Snow came down in silk. Signora Hale, Bianca said, warm as a hearth. I would like you to meet my parents. Adriano took my hand and kissed the air near it. The pleasure is ours, he said in Italian that lived in the north. Our daughter has told us you are a generous host. Lucia embraced me with impeccable timing, held released, held half-second again. At last she said, we meet the mother of the man who makes Bianca smile with all her teeth. We moved into the living room. I offered Barolo because if you plan to press people gently, it's good manners to do it with something that forgives. The conversation settled into its choreography. Lucas arrived 10 minutes later with flowers and a face lit from within. He kissed my hair without apology and shook Adriano's hand, the way men shake hands when they want to prove they were raised well. Over dinner, I asked simple questions with a homespun face. The work of teaching, the nature of municipal permits, the small geography of Naples, the streets, the sea air, the sound of scooters in the afternoon. Adriano answered with the diction of someone who reads aloud to himself. Lucia offered detail the way good politicians do, always sincere and never specific. When they spoke to each other in Italian, the music shifted slightly as if the orchestra had changed halls. Naples has a vowel you can taste. Milan smooths the vowels until they slide into the consonants like silk. Adriano's O behaved like Lombardy. Lucia's S refused to be lazy in the Neapolitan way. I asked about a bakery I loved near the port, and Adriano said he preferred one in Brera, which is in Milan and could be forgiven as a traveler's note, but not as a local's default. Bianca noticed nothing because Bianca was busy arranging the flowers of our impressions. She praised the osso buco, the linen, the way I folded the napkins into a shape that resembles a bishop's hat. She told a story about a boutique hotel in Rome that had once hosted a film festival and had to shampoo red wine out of a Persian rug at 2 a.m. Lucas laughed and refilled her glass. At dessert, almond cake and orange slices, Adriano asked about the study. He admired Miguel's desk with an intimacy that startled me. Then he asked in English if my house was original on its foundation. When I said yes, he said something to Lucia in Italian so fast, most ears would have missed it. Vale almeno 800.000. Worth at least 800,000. He wasn't wrong. He wasn't polite either. Lucia replied, con il terreno di più. With the land, more. She lifted her fork and smiled at me with perfect sweetness. Your garden, she said aloud, must be a joy in summer. I poured more coffee. The pot held steady because I'd promised my hands they could shake later. In the small hush that follows sugar, the kind where people decide whether to be honest or charming. Lucia turned to Bianca and asked in Italian she didn't bother to soften, Hai chiamato l'avvocato. Have you called the lawyer? Bianca flicked her gaze at Lucas and then at me, and replied as if discussing a dress. Dopo ci sistemiamo I documenti. After we sort the documents. Lucas does not speak Italian. He heard music. I heard logistics. Tell us about your work, Mrs. Hale, Adriano said as if cueing a scene change. Your son says you have a talent for details. I used to catalog photographs for a museum, I said. Details keep history honest. That sounds very careful, he said, as if careful were a synonym for narrow. It is, I said. Later in the kitchen, Lucas carried plates while I wrapped the leftover cake. He looked satisfied the way men look when their instincts have been affirmed by the performance of strangers. You like them, he said softly, as if speaking about weather he had ordered. They are very polished, I said, truthful as a level. He kissed my temple and went back to the dining room. I let the kitchen be a room that knew what I knew. The window above the sink reflected 3 people laughing and a woman taking in the way their mouths moved around the vowels of a language that had stopped pretending to be mine. When I returned, Adriano was telling Lucas about Naples football as if the club were a family member. Lucia leaned toward me and said in a whisper, meant for women, lui è devoto. He is devoted. She meant Lucas. She meant he will be easy to disappoint. I set down the coffee and let the words sit there like a small ember. They left before 10 with the kind of goodbye that promises continuance. On the porch, Lucia squeezed my hands and said in English, family is everything. Her eyes were bright as if the words were oxygen. You agree? I believe the people we love deserve our best attention, I said. When the door closed, the house returned to itself. The plates waited. The flowers rearranged their own faces in the dark window. Lucas stood in the hallway holding his coat, smiling the unguarded smile of a man whose narrative had been praised. They liked you, he said. They were very kind, I said. He hesitated. I'm thinking of doing something special soon. He didn't elaborate. He didn't have to. His voice had the shy lift of someone rehearsing a sentence for a jeweler. I touched his cheek the way I did when he was small and wouldn't hold still for sunscreen. Drive safe, I said. Text when you get home. When the house was quiet again, I put the plates to soak and the napkins in the laundry and stood for a long time in the doorway of the study. The desk was as we left it after Miguel's last letter about the sky. The ledger I'd started the 3 columns of name-claim proof waited with the patience of paper. I added 3 entries in neat handwriting. Adriano taught literature in Naples, cites Milan neighborhoods as home. Accent smooth north. Property values noted like line items. Lucia municipal permits contradicts timeline about reform years. Accent north. Uses Naples as jewelry. Bianca visitor visa remote work. Parents deploy legal vocabulary casually. Italian at table reveals logistics about documents. I capped the pen and looked at the page until the ink dried. Sometimes the only thing that separates suspicion from knowledge is the willingness to write it down and let it stand next to the silver. In the sink, the water went cold. I drained it and refilled with heat. Outside, the streetlight hummed the way it does when it believes no one is listening. I took the almond cake out to the porch, cut a small slice, and ate it with my coat on because sweetness tastes truer in air that pinches the nose. When I came back in, the clock in the hall clicked toward its next small certainty. I folded the dish towel over the oven handle and turned off the light. The study door closed with its familiar sigh. The house, this blue-doored bungalow, this stubborn box of wood and memory, held what it always holds, what we say out loud and what we admit on paper. Snow worked the street into a quiet shine the night Lucas arrived with Bianca for Christmas Eve dinner. I had set the good china and brought out my grandmother's silver. The table looked ceremonial, as if the house understood the need for witnesses. Lucas carried a paper-wrapped bouquet that breathed pine and orange peel. Bianca wore deep red practical boots hidden under a dress that pretended not to notice them. She kissed both my cheeks as though we were already related. "Signora, everything smells like a holiday," she said, eyes taking inventory with a smile. "It is when," I said, "and let my voice be hospitable." At 6:15, the doorbell rang again. I opened it to Nora, cheeks pink from the cold, and the woman she'd mentioned at lunch without naming, a friend from work who doesn't mind roast and long conversations. The friend introduced herself as Eva Morales, the kind of guest whose coat is simple and excellent and whose eyes keep their own notes. I set an extra place as if it had always waited there. We began with soup. Conversation moved as if someone had chalked arrows on the floor. Bianca told a story about a Christmas market in Bolzano. Lucas added a memory of a mountain storm that had stranded him during a client visit. Eva asked Bianca how consulting across time zones affected her sleep. The question so casual it could have been about vitamins. Bianca said she was resilient, that hotel work taught you to rest where you can. My kitchen timer, an old brass thing that ticks like a tiny metronome, sat on the windowsill, marking seconds the way a witness marks time in a courtroom. When it rang, I brought out the roast. We ate slowly, the way people eat when they are aware of the performance of eating. Every now and then, Eva's gaze drifted to the mantel, where Miguel's black and white photographs keep their quiet conversation with the walls. During the salad, Bianca reached under the table and squeezed Lucas's hand. He looked at me with a private brightness that lives in jewelers' display cases. He had a sentence on his tongue with a particular shape. He did not speak it. I passed the bread. We cleared plates. In the kitchen, while I wrapped the leftover fennel in parchment, Eva set down her napkin beside the sink and said softly, "In 5 minutes." She did not elaborate. She did not need to. I carried the almond cake to the table and poured coffee. The room had the slow warmth of a living thing that knows its purpose. Bianca smiled at me over the rim of her cup. "Grazie, Helen. You have the touch." "I have practice," I said. Eva placed her cup down and removed a slim leather wallet from her bag. She opened it to a badge and an identification card. Her voice found a register that left no room for mishearing. "Ms. Conti, my name is Special Agent Eva Morales with Homeland Security Investigations. I need to speak with you about discrepancies in your identity and travel history." The room pivoted without moving. Bianca's face went as still as a pond before hail. Lucas's chair scraped the floor. The sound had the rasp of a match. "What is this?" he asked. I set the coffee pot back on its stand because a steady object is a favor to a shaking moment. "Ms. Conti," Eva continued, "we have reason to believe you have used multiple identities in the United States and the European Union, including Bianca Cataldi and B. Romano, to enter into relationships and financial agreements that ended under suspicious patterns. We've documented transfers linked to short-term leases and dissolved entities that correspond to your timeline here." Bianca's accent thinned, then vanished like steam. "You have no right to come into a private home, and—" "I have a warrant," Eva said, and set a document on the table with an economy that made Lucas flinch. "You are not under arrest at this moment. You are being asked to answer questions. Whether you do so here or downtown is up to you." "What is this?" Lucas said again, but not as a question. His eyes were on me. Bianca recovered like a dancer finding the beat after a slip. The smile returned, the vowels warmed. "Lucas Amore, there is a mistake. Bureaucracy. I can fix this." She reached for him, then turned to Eva and released a practiced sigh. Agents see ghosts when they look too hard. Eva kept her gaze level. "You entered on a visitor visa," she said. "Within 6 weeks, you vacated your rental, began cohabiting informally with Mr. Hale, and made inquiries about beneficiary designations. Your parents?" She glanced at her notes. "Adriano and Lucia presented themselves with details inconsistent with Neapolitan origin, and your phone shows calls placed to a number registered to an actor's agency in Los Angeles the week before their visit." Bianca's eyes glittered cold under Christmas lights. The smile fell off like a button under strain. "So this is the plan," she said to me, American English clean as a blade. "You offer hospitality and a trap." Lucas turned toward me so fast his chair bumped the table. The coffee moved a small dark tide. "Did you do this?" I could have taken any number of sentences off the shelf about accuracy, about patience, about lists that keep people honest. None of them would fit in his chest just now. I needed facts, I said. Facts? He laughed once hard. You invited someone to interrogate Lucas, Eva said, not unkindly. I understand this is a shock. We contacted you at your office earlier today. You were in meetings. We chose to do this here because it is safer for everyone and because Ms. Conti has a pattern of leaving quickly when confronted in public. He stared at Eva as if her badge were an invention. This is insane. Bianca stood. The room's center moved with her. I'm leaving, she said. You have nothing. Eva's hand stayed near but not on her belt. Please sit down. If you leave now, this becomes a different kind of evening. Bianca's mouth compressed, the kind of line someone holds when they've worked to keep it for years. Then she turned to Lucas and let something genuine and terrible into her eyes. It looked like contempt. Oh, Lucas, she said, and didn't bother to temper it. You thought this was romance. I was bored. You were easy. Your mother is a museum of rules and you are a kiosk of passwords. The words hit like thrown ice. He took a breath as if learning to breathe in a colder climate. You told me you loved me, he said. It wasn't a plea. It sounded like someone naming an artifact found at the bottom of a drawer. I told you what you wanted to hear. She shrugged. That's the job. Eva lifted the warrant again, steady as a metronome. Miss Conti, sit down. Bianca laughed softly, then stopped laughing altogether. The air in the room changed. The performance concluded. The professional arrived. Fine, she said. She sat with the rigid grace of someone enduring a fitting. Ask your questions. Eva asked them with the patience of a carpenter. Legal names, former addresses, employers who did not know they'd hired her. Why she'd told a Colorado hotel she could leverage a film festival brand in Rome that had shuttered 3 years earlier. Bianca parried until a date cornered her. She fell quiet then, and the quiet sounded like a wall closing. Enough, Lucas said, voice raw. He stood abruptly, knocking his knee into the table. The spoons chimed. He looked at me, and I understood that he was inventorying my face for every time I hadn't told him something. How long have you been? He couldn't finish the sentence. Long enough, I said. It was the only answer that didn't pretend to make this kinder. He pushed his chair back. I needed you to tell me, he said, not to stage a raid during dinner. Eva's glance toward me was brief and unreadable. She gathered her papers. Ms. Conti, she said, quieter now based on the documents we've reviewed and corroborating statements, we're taking you into custody for further questioning. Bianca smiled a final time, not at me or Eva, but at Lucas, a kindness shaped like a knife. You will never know, she said, if the next one loves you or if she has an application to file. She held out her wrists. Shall we? Eva did not use cuffs in my dining room. She positioned herself at Bianca's side, professional gravity drawing the scene into its path. On the way to the door, Bianca paused at the mantel, considered one of Miguel's photographs of the Front Range after a storm, and said without turning Niece's house. The door opened. Winter came in and then was shut out. The porch steps sounded the departure. The street held them, then let them go. Silence arrived like a person who knows where everything goes in my kitchen. Lucas picked up the bouquet he'd brought and set it back down as if it had become heavy. He stayed standing because chairs suddenly looked treacherous. His face had the white of new plaster, the kind that has not decided yet how it will crack. You should have told me, he said again, but it was not accusation exactly. It was the description of a shape. I didn't think you'd believe me, I said. The truth landed without glory. I don't know what I would have done, he said, but I will never know now. He looked around the room as if it were a space designed by someone else. The almond cake sat under its dome like a hill under snow. The coffee had gone cold. He slid his fingers along the table's edge, the same gesture he used to make before a varsity meet when he was 17 and thought wood could steady the mind. He reached into his pocket and took out a small square box. He opened it not to show me, but to look at the thing inside as if seeing it required light. The ring was simple and old. It had lived in our family longer than anyone alive. He closed the lid with the care you give a fragile hinge. I can't be here, he said. He lifted his coat from the hall tree. I need air. Text when you get home, I said, because some sentences refused to retire. He paused in the doorway. Snow braided the light at the edge of the porch. He didn't turn when he spoke. I don't know which part hurts more, he said, her lying to me or you deciding for me. The door did not slam. It closed with the same discipline that had held the whole evening together, a precise click that respected the wood. I stood alone in the smell of orange peel and cooling roast, and the house kept being a house the way houses do, sturdy, unromantic, factual. I gathered the plates, I rinsed the cups, I folded the linen and set it aside. On the mantel, the mountains in Miguel's photograph held their snow like a thought. When the kitchen was clean, I went to the study. The ledger waited neat columns ready for whatever a person can put into words, when words are the only tools that do not shake. I sat, uncapped my pen, and wrote Christmas Eve in the margin. Then I filled the line with what can be measured, time, names, documents served. The rest of it, the cold on Lucas's face, the way contempt can wear perfume belonged to a column, The ledger did not provide. Outside, the wind pushed the porch swing into its two soft creaks. The clock in the hall marked the ordinary minutes. I let the house be ordinary around me until ordinary was something I could enter again. I slept without sleeping and woke to a house that had already done its chores of being a house, the heat lifting in the vents, the porch swing ticking its two creaks as if counting my regrets. I brewed coffee and stood at the window long enough for the sun to sand the night off the street. By noon, Eva Morales called. Her voice had the careful plainness of someone who empties a room of smoke before anyone notices the fire. She's using at least 2 legal identities, and one that was taken whole, Eva said. There is a real Conti, not your guest. Hotel coordinator in Bari, passport clean. She's been fielding questions she can't answer. Does she know our names? I asked. No, and she doesn't need to, Eva said. But there's a door here if you want to help fix what was bent. After we hung up, I sat at the study desk and wrote a sentence I could live in, make whole what can be made whole. Then I waited, which is a kind of work. 3 weeks later, a woman stepped through the sliding doors at Dan with a gray suitcase and a posture that made people look twice as if they'd seen a familiar painting in a new frame. Mrs. Hale, she said, lifting her hand. I'm Beatrice Conti. Her English was careful, not decorative. The scarf at her neck was the color of pistachios. The fabric held the crease of a long flight. We drove with the heater too high because I wanted the car to feel like a room. Beatrice watched the mountains as if measuring distance in something larger than miles. In Bari, she said, people ask me why Americans write to me about lives I do not live. She smiled without apology. Your agent explained. I came because when a name is used like a mask, it becomes difficult to breathe under it. At my kitchen table, she took out a thin folder and placed it between us. Pay stubs, emails, a photocopy of a passport page with a face that did not belong to the woman who ate almond cake in my dining room. Beatrice traced one line with her finger. This is the day my bank froze my card. They wanted to know about a lease in Colorado. I have never been to Colorado. She looked up, eyes clear. Now I have. I made soup, and we ate it in the way strangers eat when the table is building a bridge. She asked for nothing and refused nothing. In the afternoon, she dozed on my sofa with a blanket over her knees, while the porch swing recited its 2 notes. When she woke, she touched the edge of Miguel's photograph of the Front Range and said, he waited for the light to do the right thing. That evening, Lucas texted, I'm outside. I opened the door, and he stood there with the posture of a man who had walked around himself and not yet found the door back in. He looked past me, saw Beatrice rise from the sofa, and stopped moving. This is Ms. Conti, I said. Names can be courtesies when they're honest. They spoke in the living room, 2 chairs angled toward each other, the way people sit, when they don't yet know how to be closer. They compared calendars they hadn't lived, her real shifts at a seaside hotel, the fabricated meetings in Denver that had borrowed her signature. He asked what she loves about her work. The hour before guests arrived, she said, everything is possible and nothing is broken. He smiled at that. He told her about spreadsheets and the satisfaction of a column that finally balances. She nodded not as a trick, but as a person who recognizes a craft when she hears it. I moved between kitchen and hallway, doing nothing terribly necessary with deliberation. They spoke softly and sometimes not at all. When they left for a walk, Beatrice borrowed my knitted cap and Lucas offered her his gloves, and the front door closed behind them with a sound that did not make the house wince. In the days that followed, the practical work continued statements, affidavits, a bank that apologized without knowing how. Beatrice sat at my table and turned confusion into paper. Lucas carried boxes to the car and returned them empty. In the evenings, we ate simply pasta with lemon-roasted vegetables, and sometimes we did not talk about the woman who had rehearsed affection in my dining room. There are silences that don't hide. They just hold. On her last morning, Beatrice folded the blanket she'd used and set it square on the sofa. When I go home, she said, my name will fit me again. She hesitated, then added, if you come to Puglia, I will show you the bakery where the owner sings to the bread before he puts it in the oven. He says the yeast behaves better when it feels wanted. Lucas drove her to the airport. He returned with my knitted cap in his pocket and an expression I recognized from the year he learned to parallel park concentration with hope parked behind it, waiting its turn. We repaired slowly, Lucas and I, in the ordinary way repairs prefer. He sat at the study desk one afternoon and read the ledger, the columns of name-claim proof, and did not accuse the paper of betrayal. You kept track, he said. You did your best. He looked at me then, not as a son in a courtroom, but as a man in a room with another adult. Next time, he said, we do it with both of our names on the paper. I nodded. The porch swing answered with 2 creaks. Spring tilted the city toward green. Months later, I stood in a church in Polignano a Mare, where the wind comes salted through a door. Someone never bothers to close. The ceremony was not mine to narrate. I watched the way photographs watch from mantles as people promised to be careful with each other in a town built on stone. After we ate outside under strings of lights that made the sky look persuaded. Someone sang. Someone passed bread that remembered an old song. When I flew home, the house received my suitcase with its usual tolerance. I set a new photograph on the mantel beside Miguel's mountains, a small table, 2 coffee cups, a shoreline that leans into the Adriatic like a shoulder. The porch swing kept time. The clock in the hall did what clocks do. I boiled water for tea and opened the study door. The ledger lay where I'd left it, ready for another line if one were needed. For now, the page held. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.